Hello, everybody, and happy Easter. I've decided finally, after about 4 years since the event, to create more of a questions and answers video about the experiences that I had. And I'm sure those of you that have watched the video, the main video about my experiences, the supernatural experiences, probably do have some pretty interesting questions. I've personally had a whole bunch of questions the last several years. And those questions are questions that other people couldn't answer, that I couldn't answer. I've read lots of books. I've poured through stories from other people who've had supernatural experiences. And I thought it'd be really maybe useful if I took some time to create a video where I walk through what I have learned and what I have gathered from the information that I've sort of explored since those experiences, and just kind of deliver it to you. So that's what this video is about. So what we're going to do is we're going to work through some various questions and conclusions that I've had, and provide an opportunity to maybe start some discussions with people if you have anything that you wanted to dive deeper into, perhaps. So happy Easter, and let's go ahead and get started with the first question. What is deliverance? This is an interesting term. Normally when you talk to people in churches, you'll hear the word salvation. Deliverance is another word for salvation. I actually like the word deliverance a little bit more. The idea is that rather than some sort of mystical thing that happens, deliverance is more direct. The idea that I see is sort of like somebody that has been kidnapped. They need deliverance, right? They need to be rescued from the captivity of another person, or in the case of my story, of another being. So the idea of deliverance is essentially that, at least in my story, I was held captive by another being. And as the story progressed, from what you saw in my previous video, the ending point is me being delivered from this dark being that had been harassing me, right? So deliverance is quite simple, actually. It's the foundation of the Christian message, and it is the reason that Christianity has been teaching for the Easter season for now 2,000 years. So that's what deliverance is. I might point out a couple other things about it. First of all, my name Joshua is the Hebrew Yeshua, right? That was the foundation for the name Jesus, right? So in Greek, Jesus is it is the translation from Hebrew into Greek. And Yeshua means Yahweh saves, or Yahweh is salvation. It can probably be interpreted both ways, both as passive, a passive act of salvation, or an active act of salvation, right, of rescuing. But I would point out that the idea of deliverance is very akin to the story of the Hebrews being rescued from the Egyptians, to rescued out of that slavery. And as I understand it now, the idea of our being rescued is very similar. Jesus came to rescue us from the grasp of dark powers, of evil powers that are enslaving mankind in a direction that is outside of the will of God. That is the core of what the Christian message is about. And that is, I believe, what I was shown. And you can have lots of other questions probably pop up now about, like, well, why is there, UFOs involved? Or like, what's up with this Padre Pio and the Protestant church and stuff? And so we're going to get into some more of those questions as we continue here. But that is the answer for the first question of what is deliverance. Okay, for those of you that are not Christians that may be watching this video and are just curious about what happened because it was such a strange story, a top question you may have is, other people have tons of spiritual experiences too. How do we know which ones to trust? And I'll be frank, this is probably the one question that bothered me the most in the last 4 years. Because as I looked back, I realized, okay, I had these incredible supernatural experiences, and there were even more than I shared in the video. But as I searched the internet, I found tons of other stories. And a lot of these stories maybe don't have direct contradictions, but the storylines don't seem to line up. So you'll get somebody who's like, I had a near-death experience where they go to hell and then they get rescued by Jesus. Something like the Howard Storm story, which if any of you have looked into near-death experiences, that's like a really popular one. So you have like the Howard Storm story, right? Very crystal clear, sort of like being rescued from the powers of darkness. Very similar to mine, except in a near-death format. And then you have other stories where people are like, they're told by some light beings that there is no hell, that, we create our own reality, this sort of thing, right? And so an obvious question is, well, which ones matter, right? How do we know which ones of these are actually true? For those of you that may be coming from a UAP or UFO backgrounds, you might be like, in a lot of those stories, there's really strange after effects and really strange dreamlike qualities to the stories that people will tell about their interaction with UFOs, for example. And you might look at my story and say, well, Josh is just going through the same type of thing. And one of the themes of the UFO community that keeps coming back up over and over and over is this sort of Jacques Vallée idea that there are beings that are interacting with humanity, but we don't know if we can trust any of the messages, right? So obvious question is, well, how do you know you can trust any of your story, Josh? How do you know any of it's true or not? I have given this more thought than you can imagine, and I've prayed this question over and over as well. And the conclusion I've come to is that if there are beings that are greater than mankind, and we look around the world and we see both good and evil being done in the world. You see people that do selfless acts, and you see people that are doing selfish acts or more blatant evil acts, right? It would make sense that if there are these beings that are above humanity, that they would be capable of both of these types of interactions as well. Can we prove it? Not necessarily, but it would make sense. So whether they are aliens or angels, aliens meaning from another planet, or angels meaning some interdimensional beings, I would just simply propose that there's the possibility of there being good ones with good intentions and bad ones with bad intentions. And it would be a reasonable conclusion to conclude that both of them exist. You have both ones with bad intentions and ones with good intentions, right? And so, given that this is a reasonable conclusion, it would also make sense that some of the experiences that people have are deceptive. Some of the experiences that people have might actually be true as well, right? Then the next obvious question would be, well, okay, which ones can we trust, right? Which ones of these experiences can we trust are from the good or from the bad? And after giving it considerable thought, I realized that we can't test the supernatural experiences that people have in a scientific way. There's no lab where you can take a person's story and run it through some sort of like a rigorous test to determine whether it's their personal UFO experience or their personal paranormal experience or whatever it may be is from a being that we can trust. We do know that obviously if a being directly lies, then that being can't be trusted. And okay, we've got that. But there's this aspect or this quality to a lot of the supernatural experiences that people have where what they go through oftentimes involves like symbolic or dreamlike qualities. In other words, like in my story, for example, I have this experience where I have a dream that's a quote from Padre Pio's book that I didn't know about until 15 years later or so, right? And okay, so you've got this sort of dreamlike quality going on, and then you ask the question, well, okay, did that come from Padre Pio or did that come from somewhere else, right? How do I know that there wasn't a being that just wanted me to think that, right? That there wasn't just a being that wanted me to think that this was from Padre Pio or whatnot. The more I thought about it, the more I really dug into this idea, the more I realized that the only way you can actually tell whether a person's experience with supernatural beings is something that is aligned with God. That's probably the way I would put it, is aligned with the good or aligned with God, is the sort of the fruits, I guess you could say, of what the outcome is, right? And for those of you who may be listening that have more of a strict, I guess you could say a strict biblical background, you may say, oh, Josh, it's really simple. You just compare it with what's in the Bible. I will challenge you very strongly on that point, and here's why, okay? You cannot just compare a person's present supernatural experiences with what is written in the text, because if the disciples or the people in the first century would have followed that same principle, nobody would have ever believed anything that happened around the early church. Think about it for a moment. Baptism, right? Mainstay, foundational sacrament of both the Protestant Catholic Church. Okay, right? There is nothing in the Old Testament about baptisms being done as a symbol of repentance. There are some hints, but it's never explicitly laid out. So someone comes along like John the Baptist and is suddenly interacting with or associated with paranormal events, right? And if you're thinking, oh, is this biblical or not? It would not have been biblical to accept baptism. However, the fruits of the baptism were people that were growing closer in their love and their goodness toward each other. Okay? So that's how I view it. And so to some extent, when it comes to the paranormal experiences that people have, there are some themes that I now look for. One, are there any direct lies in the paranormal experience? Some people have had UFO experiences where like these alien beings or whatever, abduction experiences, right? Where the alien beings say they're from Venus or something like that and they have a community there or something. Obvious lie. Should not listen to anything else they say, right? So lies straight out. However, the ones that are a little more esoteric or sort of fluid, or I don't know how to describe it, like they're more dreamlike, right? I would primarily look at whether they acknowledge the existence of good and evil. That's a starting point. If they say that, if the experiences that people are having are sort of brushing aside or not making a big deal about the of the evil that does exist in the world, I am tempted to say it is probably not something from God. Okay? There will be an acknowledgement of the good and the evil. There will be a direct reference at some point during the entire thing to Jesus, because obviously, out of all the people in human history, right, that man, God-man, was more associated with interactions from heaven. In fact, he was preaching about the kingdom of heaven being near, right? Okay, so whatever story, if it's going to be consistent within human history, has to have an acknowledgement of Jesus as being part of it, right? And then I would say that, and this one might be a little bit more controversial. I would say that if the revelation is, how shall I say it? If it's getting bogged down in details of exactly like what you need to believe, this sort of thing, exact details of like, I'm not sure how to describe this. I'm thinking of something along the lines of some of the cults, right? Where you'll get like somebody who gets a revelation and then they start to like be really nitpicky and controlling, right, of other people, controlling in sort of that cult-like fashion. Those can definitely be rejected as well. And as I look back on the experience that I had, the experiences I had, I can look at them and I can say that those themes were closely matched in my experience. You've got an acknowledgement of Jesus, the existence of good and evil. You have no cult-like qualities in it. I do not feel led to start like a movement or like start a church around this or whatever. And trust me, I had a couple of people tell me, they were like, Josh, you could start a church, you could start a cult, right? I do not have any desire to do that at all. And in the end, it's the whole experience that I went through was about the battle between good and evil. And like we mentioned in the previous question, it is about deliverance, or being rescued from the evil and pulled into that which is good. And that is why I believe that even if the elements in the story are incredibly symbolic, we can still trust the conclusion of the story. Okay, this is a tougher question. This one may not be quite as understood by people who maybe have more of a Christian background, but this will be understood by those who are watching this that maybe are a little more familiar with the UAP phenomena or UFOs. I touched on it a little bit in the previous question. The question is, how do we know that there are not some beings, aliens, that sort of thing, that are interacting with humanity and they just want us to believe in Christianity? A great example of this might be, well, maybe Jesus was just a man and he was sort of placed here or promoted by some interdimensional beings or by some aliens. And he was just an example of who we should follow, but it's not a real story. It's just sort of like put there to kind of inspire us or give us something to shoot for. This is the sort of star child thing that you'll hear sometimes in the New Age movement. The idea being that, some people are placed here and they're pre-enlightened beings, and Jesus was one of the master of all of them, that sort of thing, right? This is a theme that will often get promoted in those groups. On a dark side of things, there will be some people in the UFO UAP community that might propose that, well, all of humanity is potentially enslaved by these beings, but just like we pet the animals that we're gonna slaughter and eat, so these beings sometimes do good things for us and inspire us and give us all this stuff to try and keep us civil while they have some nefarious plan for us off on the side, right? This is the theme of the question. How do we know that we can trust the story of Jesus, for example? And I would propose to you that it may not matter. Let me give you sort of a walkthrough of why. It may not matter because if there are beings that have some nefarious meaning for us, it still may be in our best interest to follow the story. I don't think that's actually true. I'm just leading the thought here, right? Because even when we take our cows to the vet, right, it's still in their best interest for the cows to go to the vet, even though at the end of the day we may actually be eating the cows. Make sense? Okay. All right. Pause there. I am not suggesting that that is actually the case with all of humankind and our future. I'm simply pointing out that it still may be a good thing if that were the case, right? Okay. Now, how do we know that's probably not true? And I'm going to reference back to what I said previously, and that is that if there are beings here on Earth right now that can have good intentions toward others, and I think we can agree there are good people out there, right? Then there are good beings as well, and that those beings, when they do interact with humanity, can be trusted. They have some good purpose for humanity. And you could say that these would be the angels, right? Angels, they're messengers from God for the good to help mankind move toward deliverance or move toward salvation, right? That's their purpose, is even though we don't understand all the details about this, that's their purpose. So I think it's a reasonable conclusion that when beings do show up, that are pointing the direction that I'm talking about here, that they can be trusted and they should be listened to. They obviously know more about what's going on with humans than we do, right? If they have demonstrated repeatedly a desire to see humans flourish and thrive and have greater life, that's a good sign right there. If they know about things that might happen in the future or will happen in the future, if they have a consistent message throughout history, and I would propose that the basic foundational elements of Christianity are something that has been consistent in the revelations within both Catholic and Protestant churches throughout the last 2,000 years. Yes, there are some strange things in some of the stories. I acknowledge that, but I'm saying that the foundational message has been consistent. The idea of being Jesus coming to earth and in some capacity dying on behalf of us to rescue us from powers of darkness. That's the foundational message of Christianity. So it would make complete sense that there's a consistency of the story here. And I don't think that it would make sense that some nefarious beings invented this story just for human flourishing. I don't think that really stands up to scrutiny. I think that that would imply that there's really not a single good being in the realm above us. Right? Now, that's not probable. We know that even here on Earth, even though the number of truly good people, I guess you could say, would be very small, in the realm above us, wherever this interdimensional beings are, aliens, whatever you want to call them. Okay, I'm not even going to go as far as Christianity right now. Let's say that they do exist. There's got to be at least a couple of them that are good, right? And if there's at least a couple of them are good, then they're going to show up and they're actually going to try and help who? The people that are trying to pursue the same type of goodness that they are involved with, if that makes sense, right? And I think to some extent that's what Jesus was talking about when he said that he had a message, right? His message was the kingdom of heaven is near or at hand, right? The idea that the kingdom of heaven is touching down to earth, and then repent or have a change of heart or have a change of mind. And the idea being that these two need to meet, right? Kingdom of heaven is near, repent, right? The idea being you're going to meet in the middle, right? So I think for that reason, the story makes significantly more sense if it was real rather than if it was something that was completely invented and Jesus was just a plant that was placed here on earth to distract humans from some grander purpose. Which parts of my experience can actually be trusted? Okay, we've established in the previous question that the whole theme might be able to be trusted, but I have had at least one person kind of bring up the idea that perhaps, well, Josh, maybe some of those experiences you had, like the UFO portion of the experience or the Padre Pio portion, maybe that was demonic, right? Maybe there were some evil beings that were just trying to trick or confuse you. And yes, these suggestions come from people in the Protestant community because the Protestants, there's a large collection of Protestants that have been taught that all of Catholicism is essentially run by the devil behind the scenes. Not joking. It's a little ridiculous if you ask me, but I don't deny that there are demonic elements behind different churches across the entire spectrum. I'm simply saying that I do not think it is a safe conclusion. However, it's a good question that's being proposed. How do you know which elements of the story can be trusted? And in my story, you've got primary themes, right? You've got the whole dream when I was 15 and the Padre Pio connection. There's the prayer that I made about here's the list of things I want as proof. There's this ghost in this apartment, this Airbnb, right? And the ghost in the apartment, the Airbnb, followed by you had that the first sighting of the two UFO craft in the sky, the entire summer of the UFOs, or the UAP, if you want to call them that. There was the angelic experience in the apartment. There was the slight prophetic message about deliverance that led to the church, right? These are the kind of primary themes. Well, which ones can be trusted? Like, I mean, maybe some of them were from the devil and some of them were from God, right? So a Protestant might say, well, the final ending of the story, that was from God. But the other portion was the devil just trying to throw me off track. there are some elements that I did not explain in the original story that I believe were directly demonic. But I believe that all of the pieces of the story were ultimately from God. And the reason is that there was a chain. There was an unbroken chain of all these experiences, right? I have the dark presence when I'm in my teen years, and I have a dream in the midst of that for it was several years of this, right? This dark demonic presence showing up in my room. I have a dream in the middle of it, right? Dream about a quote of a man I had never heard of in my life, Padre Pio, right? That obviously from God, but that was planted so that I would know later to be able to connect it together, right? So I have that dream. I say the prayer, right? God, angels, aliens, if anything's out there, I want to believe that you exist, that there's truth to it, but I need this list of things to happen in order for me to believe, right? Clearly, God was listening to that one too. And you could argue the devil was listening too, sure, or demons or whatever other beings or aliens. Everybody's listening. Let's just put it that way. Fast forward though, and if I had not had the ghost experience in that apartment, the voice of that woman that spoke to me twice in answer to the prayer, I would not have met Rodney, or Rick, as I mentioned him in my written story. I would not have met Rodney. And Rodney was the one who, a year later, recommends to me Padre Pio. So if I hadn't had that experience, I wouldn't have been connected with Rodney, who was the witness in the apartment that recommended the book, right? If I had not had the UFO experience, which you might say, well, maybe the UFOs were demonic, right? A lot of people in the church will say that. If I had not had that happen, I wouldn't have eventually been paying attention enough to the star in the sky. I wouldn't have made the connection that I need. The star in the sky might be related to the star that led the Magi to where Jesus was born. And I wouldn't have connected those together to follow it, right? To see where it went, to show up at the church to have the deliverance message, right? So, and the week that I first saw the two silver craft in the sky, that was the week that Rodney recommended the Padre Pio book to me. So these things are all sort of connected together. And I don't know that you can remove any one of these from the story without breaking the entire chain of the story. And that's part of the reason why I just tell the whole story. I cannot say the identities of these beings, and we'll get to that question a little bit here, but I can say the result or the fruit of it was me coming back to faith in Jesus. So the end result, the fruit, was good. And I think that there's reasons for why I was shown the things I was. And I think it's important to talk about it. Along with this idea of which parts can you trust, there's also a suggestion or a theme of, well, Josh, why not just leave out certain parts of the story and just focus on the end? I do not think at all that that's what God wants me to do. I think God wants me to tell the whole story, all of it, not leave anything out, be completely honest and truthful about the whole thing. I did mention that I had some experiences that were demonic. I'm going to tell one of them now. When I was in my apartment in Stockholm, this would have been after all of the supernatural experiences happened. I was dealing with a significant amount of spiritual activity in my apartment. I could feel it. And one night I'm going to bed, and this is kind of terrifying, so it's kind of hard for me to talk about. I'm going to bed and I'm laying in bed all alone in my apartment. And I had this thought in my head that, oh, wait, I need to go turn out the light in the living room. And I kid you not, right after I had that thought, I heard a click and the light went out in the living room. And I sat there in bed your first thought is not, I wasn't scared right away. I was just sort of like, am I hearing things, right? Did a pen fall off a table or something, right? But I saw the light out my door. I saw the light go off. So I knew the light went off when the click happened, right? So I go out into the hallway and I'm looking down the hallway, and living room is dark, walk down, and I could feel this charged presence of something. And I look over, light switches off, and I'm like, okay, I have no idea whether what I'm facing right now is good or bad. Because a light switch turning off is a pretty innocuous thing. You can't ascribe goodness or badness to light switches switching off, right? And it seemed helpful, right? I mean, it seemed helpful to have the light switch off, right? But what I decided to do is I decided to do a test. And the test was basically, hey, and I said this out loud, said, hey, I know you're there. I don't know who you are. If you are not here from Jesus, I want you to leave. And at that exact moment, another light switched off. And I don't know where this light was coming from. It was so strange because there was this on the ceiling. I didn't even notice it when I walked in the living room. There was a pattern of lights on the ceiling that right after I said, I want you to leave, basically, this pattern of lights that had been shining on the ceiling just went off. And then I felt something leave. And I stood there stunned. And then I spent a good 15, 20 minutes trying to turn on and off lights in my apartment. I mean, I was looking at the router. I was looking at my computer, on, off. Was it something? What was shining on the ceiling? What light was shining on the ceiling? I couldn't find anything. And that was a pretty terrifying experience. And I would say that was probably something demonic then. So I would say that another thing you can do as sort of a test of which parts of the story can you trust, just simply ask God. Say, hey, I want to know. I realize there's a lot of strange stuff going on in the spiritual realm, the interdimensional realm. There's probably life on planets out there, outside of us. There's probably other universes. There's probably life forms galore, right? Out there. How do you know which ones are aligned with God? You need to ask. And set up that test to say, hey, if you're not here aligned with the same mission that Jesus came to fulfill, you are not invited. You are not allowed into this situation. So that is the ultimate test, I think, that we can make about these types of stories. What or who was that woman ghost in the Airbnb apartment in London? I have pondered this question over and over and over because it's such a strange answer to somebody who's seeking some truth about the spiritual or interdimensional realm. I asked the question, hey, if there's anything out there, I need proof. Here's what I need. I need something that happens more than once. I need a witness present. I need it to be external from my head so that way I knew it wasn't just something that was being conjured up by me or by another person. And I shouldn't be able to find any natural explanation for what happened. And I got my first answer to this question by a voice speaking to me in an apartment in London. What in the world does this mean, right? We obviously know the conclusion to the whole thing, but who was that, right? Who was that spoke to me? And well, initially you could think, well, okay, maybe it was the devil. I have a hard time with this one because I cannot see why the devil would want so desperately to answer my prayer. Because the devil was obviously incredibly angry at me a little while later, if you've watched the story, with me just even coming back to a belief in anything supernatural. So why would the devil be a tool trying to bring me back to a belief in the supernatural? I was an atheist. I was living in Sweden. I was completely oblivious to all spiritual things. It seems to me that it would be in the best interest of dark forces to keep me in that place. So whoever was there in the apartment, in my opinion, was aligned with the good. Was it a ghost? Was this a dead person from the past who had a mission to give me that message in the apartment, to answer my prayer, essentially. I actually think this is a fairly decent theory. I know Catholics are much more open to this, with the idea of purgatory, the idea being that there are some people who die, and rather than going straight to heaven or to a permanent hell, there's the in-between area. And the in-between area may involve either being stuck here in a spiritual form on earth, or perhaps some layers of purgatory. The idea being that you still need to go through a process of growth and purifying of your heart to remove any selfish remnants left in you. I think this might actually make a little bit of sense. Like, for example, and obviously I'm just making this up as I go, there's no proof for this, but maybe there was somebody that died, and their mission was to remain here on earth and fulfill certain things to prove to people about the existence of things in the spiritual realm. Who knows? Maybe that's what it is. Another possibility is it was an angel. I lean against this one. And the reason I lean against this one is because the woman who owned the apartment, and I know this because Rodney told me that he had talked to her extensively about it. The woman who owned the apartment had been having experiences with a disembodied woman and supernatural paranormal things associated with that for, I think it was around 20 years before I had my experience. Meaning that if it was just an angel showing up to give me that message while I was there, it'd be very odd that the angel had been like there for 20 years. Maybe there are some angels that they just that something about it, like that's their interaction with this realm. Who knows? I think that at the end of the day, going back to the previous question, the fruit, what came out of this, right? What was the ultimate thing that came out of this? The ultimate thing that came out of it was me beginning to believe in the spiritual realm again, and to have some hope that there was some good coming out of it. And I think about the story a lot because one of the things that stood out to me was that if you're a ghost, you can kind of go anywhere, right? That would be the idea. Or if you're a spiritual being, that's the way we think about it, at least, whether it's true or not. It was very polite, very thoughtful. There was nothing about it that scared me. There was nothing about it that, I take that back. I was a little bit afraid. It's a little disconcerting to have something like that happen. Let's just be fair. But it wasn't a terror-inducing evil feeling or anything like that. I did not get the goosebumps, right, that I had when I was dealing with the dark demonic presence. I did not have that feeling of malevolence or hate or evil or anything like that. It was a very different sensation once I realized that this was not a person standing outside the bathroom door. So from that point, I don't know. I don't know the answer. The direction I lean is that it was most likely a person who that was part of their mission, part of their for whatever reason, whether they were trapped here or whatever, I have no way of knowing. But that'd be where I'd lean if I had if I wanted to make a theory about it. But there's no way for me to prove this. I can't prove any of this. I just know where it led. So yeah. Who were the angels that were in my apartment? Okay, so to revisit the story just a little bit, a week or so after I first saw those two silver orbs in the sky with my friend Jacob in Stockholm, I had that chat with Rodney where we were discussing what happened with the ghost voice in the apartment, okay? The ghost voice thing had happened like a year before, right? And so we're a little bit deep into the story here, but so I had that chat with Rodney, and at that point in time, I was also experiencing a return of this dark demonic presence in my life. It had been going on for several months. And so probably about 3 or 4 months. And when this happened, when I had that conversation with Rodney, was near the end of I believe it was April. So what is it? It's like April 9th or 10th right now, and then so it was around this time. This would have been 4 years ago, right? Okay, so okay, after I have the conversation with Rodney where he confirms to me, Josh, whatever was in that apartment, I heard it. I talked to the owner of the apartment more about that experience. He starts telling me about how this had been going on for 20 years in this apartment, and that what I experienced was like this really unique thing. And then he tells me that, he believes that I was given a special message from God and that he was supposed to be the witness, right? That whole thing where like I hadn't told him about my prayer in my early 20s, right? He didn't know that I prayed to have a witness present when I had a supernatural experience. Right after that phone call, right? Hang up, dark presence comes back in the room. I'm terrified again. I'm like, what is going on? And that was when I had two, I guess you could say, light beings or angels that appeared in the apartment and then split to either end of the apartment. And I felt a voice tell me, you need this protection. Going back to the deliverance theme, right? I need to be delivered from something. There's an evil being, clearly. And the thing was, when those two white beings, like, appeared in the apartment, went to either end, they pushed out this evil. I could still tell it was there, but it was no longer getting close to me. I was being protected. Who were these angels, right? I'm going to approach this a little differently. Okay, so a lot of people will say that they've had like an angelic experience and they'll be like, oh, it was Michael or Gabriel or whatever, blah, blah, blah. Something that I want to point out, something that I would like to point out is that almost every single one of the names that is ever referenced in ancient Jewish literature, Old Testament, the Apocrypha, that sort of thing, the names have a meaning. So if you look up the meaning of angelic names, it's almost a job description or a representative description of how they are interacting with the person they are talking to at that moment, right? And it's almost as if in the spiritual realm, names are not given the same way we think of names. When we give a name to somebody, right, or to a pet or something like that, what we're doing is we're saying, I am separating you apart from all the other things because there's something different about you, right? But that is not, I guess you could say, the final name of that thing. That name is just an ascribed thing that we've given to something. And generally, the name is given with the idea that the person who gave the name has authority over the thing that they've given name to, or ownership over the thing that they've given the name to, right? So you do not name your neighbors, right? Like you name your kids, the idea being that you've been granted authority over those kids that you are in you're to protect them, right? So to some extent, I would almost make the argument that who was in the apartment is actually far less important than what they were doing. And I think of the passage like in the Bible where Jacob wants to know the name of that man who fought him, right? So, and the man, who we find out later is God or an angel of the Lord, says, why do you want to know my name? And I think about that a lot, because I wanted to know who these two angels were, but I never got the answer. And trust me, I prayed many, many times. I was like, who are you? And this ties into something really interesting too, because if you remember, I said that there were two silver craft in the sky. And so I often wondered, I was like, well, are those two silver craft the same two angels that I saw? Does it matter? How do I know? Am I supposed to make a connection here, like an important connection? I'm going to propose that I think there are symbolic elements to people's supernatural experiences that may be doing things subconsciously with the person that they may not fully understand. And that goes for me too. There may very well be some connections there. And the exact identity of the beings is far less important than the long-term effects of their interaction with us, if that makes sense. We may not find out until we die or until much later. But as we can imagine, I mean, for those of you who are Christians who are watching this, Think about how selfless we should be in our giving to others, right? Think about like maybe there's a person you know that needs money and you give it anonymously. The person who receives the money, right? Do you care that they know who you are? That they know your name? No, you just gave it selflessly. That's what goodness does. Goodness just gives and doesn't care about receiving recognition for something, if that makes sense. So to some extent, I think heaven does that with us. Sometimes it's just, whoop, like you got like an anonymous angel that shows up and does something and disappears. And you're left thinking, what in the world? And quite frankly, I imagine maybe they get a kick out of it, you know? Show up, help someone, don't care about the rewards, just helping and loving and doing something good. So yeah, I have no idea who those angels were. And maybe someday I'll know, but I just am thankful that they were there, and I'm just hoping and praying that they have plenty of opportunities to go help other people. Were the silver craft and the orbs that I saw at night, were these physical UFOs? I dealt with this question a lot more about a year and a half ago, and I prayed about it a lot. And what I discovered does give me a lot of pause. So when we traditionally think of angels, we think of interdimensional beings that, at least within Christianity, these interdimensional beings are sort of amorphous. They sort of like float in and about. They don't have physical form, but they can appear physical, right? There's sort of like this, there's this dreamlike quality to their existence, right? When we think of a UFO, we might think of like the classic disc-shaped craft, and we think of it as like some sort of metal, right? That has some technology that we don't understand, that it gives it abilities to do things with physics that it gives it the ability to do stuff with physics that are beyond our comprehension now, but in time we could learn how to do it ourselves if we just knew enough about physics, right? These are two different categories. This is the traditional dualist view of like there's the supernatural and then there's the natural. I'm going to propose that maybe they're the same thing, meaning that the supernatural and the natural are the same thing. They are just the natural realm is a projection, or sort of like a contained reality within the what we would traditionally consider the supernatural realm. Now, you might say, well, Josh, how do we know that? Why would you even make this connection in the first place, right? Why would you make the connection that maybe the star that I saw in the sky was the same thing? Well, first of all, I think that it was intentionally done that I would see during the daytime, because remember the first time I saw this, it was during the daytime, bright blue sky, and I see those two tiny silver craft in the sky with my friend. Well, a little while later, I'm seeing more toward nighttime. The first time it wasn't nighttime, it was still blue, and it was a bright light, so it wasn't silver this time. And I see this, half a dozen times or so over the next 6 months. Well, how do I know the same thing? I'm gonna guess that they probably were. And then I was praying about it, and I got connected with somebody who referenced a story to me, and it's about a guy named Gary Stearman, who's actually from Wichita, Kansas. I grew up in Wichita, and Gary Stearman shares this story. In the story, Gary Stearman, who is now a Christian, says that he was flying a plane here in Texas. I'm in Texas now. This is actually kind of funny. He was flying a plane in Texas, and he had a UFO come up next to him. This a metallic classic UFO craft flies near his plane. Well, he tried to put his plane closer to this metallic craft, and the metallic craft flew off into the distance. And guess what it looked like when it flew off into the distance? It looked like a star on the horizon. And because of this story, I have concluded that it may very well be true that there's a combination of technologies that are coupled with living beings, if that makes sense, that have interactions that are something that we can't comprehend. And so when angels are appearing to people, when the traditional angels that you hear about in stories are appearing to people, who knows? Maybe they're using a technology to do this. That doesn't mean that what they're doing can't be trusted. Just like when we help an animal with a technology, right? That doesn't mean that the technology can't be trusted or that we can't be trusted or whatever. It may very well be that this idea of beings interacting and working with things and using tools and stuff is something that's extensive throughout all of God's creation, right? So I think it's cool from the standpoint that it kind of gives this idea that this is real, right? What we're interacting with when we're interacting with this supernatural phenomenon, the paranormal phenomena, it's real. It's all real. Do we know how it all works together? No, we don't. But I do think that God intentionally gave me some of these connections because heaven wanted me to research and study this stuff and wants to give all of us sort of a little picture, a little glimpse into what is going on in the interdimensional realms. So that way we can grow as humans and in our understanding of the universe. So I would tend to lean toward an answer to this question, yes. That it may very well be true that what I saw was actually UFO craft. And I realize that this throws a giant wrench into the birth of Jesus, because if the star that you're putting on top of your Christmas tree is a traditional UFO, but that led these men to where Jesus was born, that it's a little strange. But let's be fair. There's a lot of stuff about the story that's strange and also wonderful. So yeah, that's where I'm at right now. I have no way of obviously going back and proving any of this, but that's where I'm at right now on this whole thing. Who was this dark being that was harassing me from my teenage years, and then also when I started to come back to faith? This is a very similar question to the question of who were the angels in the apartment. I never got a name. I never had a voice speak out of thin air at me. I never had, I didn't have any like weird notes appear in my apartment or anything like that. I never went to a priest who confirmed something about this dark presence. Nothing like that ever happened. So I don't have a name. I think it's an interesting idea. Like, we have these names to refer to in the church. You have these names to refer to evil beings, Satan, the devil, and then there are a variety of other ones within Judaism as well. And it's interesting that, again, we're so interested in names, we'd like identities. And I think it probably, in the end, doesn't really matter as well. All I know was there was some sort of a dark demonic being. Demonic meaning evil intentions, right? A being with evil intentions that was harassing me endlessly in my teens. And that, as the story progressed, ended up being something I needed to be rescued from. And I was. That's it. That's all I know. And maybe to some extent it just doesn't even matter, yeah. But I use different terms to refer to it: the devil, Satan, whatever. But I can't say for sure. Is it the Satan, that was there? I don't know that I will know. But if I ever do find out some information, I will be glad to share. So. Was it Padre Pio who gave me the dream? So, revisiting back with the story, I would have been roughly 14, 15 years old, somewhere in there, when I had the dream of the dog that lunged out of the darkness at me, right? How do I know? Well, I know now that obviously that's a quote from Padre Pio about the devil's like a rabid dog who's on a chain, and beyond the length of the chain, he cannot reach. But was it Padre Pio that actually gave me the dream? I have no idea. I've thought about this a lot because it's like, well, okay, did an angel show up and give me that? Was this just a nod back to Padre Pio, or was it actually Padre Pio? I don't think it really matters. It's an interesting question to think about. I think that, well, for those of you who don't know, when Padre Pio, before he passed away back in, I think it was the end of the 40s or the early 50s, he said that he wouldn't enter heaven until all the souls that were in his charge had made it to heaven themselves. So he would stand at the gates, right? And who knows whether heaven has literal gates or whatever, maybe not. But the theme being that he did not want to enter into eternal pleasure until he had a chance to help as many souls as possible also get there. So with that in mind, I think that it is quite possible that Padre Pio was involved in my story and was very instrumental in the entire thing. Certainly would know about it, and for that reason, I have a lot of respect and admiration for Padre Pio. Why did all of my spiritual experiences stop when I became an atheist? Okay, so back when I did become an atheist, I had a dream, and in the dream, I felt like I was being demon possessed, and it was a pretty terrifying dream. And then when I woke up from the dream, I woke up right at the moment that my entire body was fully possessed by this demonic being. And I remember thinking, oh man, I'm so glad that was just a dream, because obviously the only reason I had that dream was because my mind had been filled with all this religious crap when I was younger. That was what was going through my head at the time, that I just thought it was just some subconsciously conjured dream about demons, because that's what I was taught growing up, right? And then all of my spiritual experiences stopped. So after that dream, I do not remember any spiritual experiences. I would have been like 23 maybe when I had the dream, 22, somewhere around there. And then, for the next 10 years until I was that experience in London, I did not have any experiences. I don't remember a single paranormal experience. I don't remember a single supernatural experience. I don't remember ever having that dark presence in my room. That never came back after I had that dream. And I felt free of all of the supernatural paranormal weirdness, and was just enjoying being an atheist. I think legitimately that what happened was I had unwittingly made a pact, and the devil's response was, well, I don't need to interact. Basically, to remain an atheist, Josh cannot have any supernatural experiences. So I'm going to blind Josh off to all of this, right? And I think that is what generally happens with the majority of atheists, is that they're perfect right where they are. So you'll have people who are like, for example, in the New Age, and they will talk about, their ghost experiences, hauntings, that sort of stuff. It's almost like if an atheist encounters those people, right, then there might be the possibility that the atheist is going to stop being an atheist, which means you're getting a little bit closer to the truth. You see what I'm saying? And so to some extent, I think that's what happens with a lot of people who are on that agnostic atheist spectrum, is that the devil's just basically like, sure, great. You're on my crew, and I'm going to let you sit here and never have a supernatural experience, because as soon as you do, you're going to start asking questions about what's going on. So I think that's what happened. Well, thank you very much, first of all, for listening to everything I've presented. I'm hoping that this format of breaking things up into pieces like this is really useful. And I'm sure there's lots more questions I could answer. I might do that in a later video, but for now, this video is getting pretty long. And I hope that, to tie everything back together to the beginning, that the theme of this idea of being delivered from evil is really clear in the message here, because I think that is one of the foundational things that I was shown and that I'm supposed to share with others, is that the devil really does, the devil, Satan, whatever name you want to give these dark beings, really want to keep people from understanding that there is more going on to life in this universe, and wants to keep people in the dark, just like evil does. And each person needs to be rescued from whatever aspect of that darkness they are involved in. And this Easter, remember that, Jesus did die and rise from the dead. And in some capacity, this was the mechanism that God chose to deliver salvation to us. And for that, I am forever grateful. And I just hope and pray that each person who listens to this takes this message to heart. So thank you, and happy Easter.